High above the world, where clouds crown the mountains, there was a place untouched by mortal hands. It was Olympus, the shining seat of the gods, where eternity stretched like endless dawn. Here, the winds carried songs of muses, and the stars bent close to listen. The halls were bright with golden fire, and laughter often rolled like thunder in the skies. At the heart of this realm sat Zeus, king of the gods, keeper of storms and guardian of order. His voice could shake the heavens, his glance could steady the earth, his will bound all things. Yet even in such power, silence found a way to creep into the chambers of his heart. The world knew him as unyielding, but within lingered a weight, unseen, unspoken. It was not a storm of rage, nor the blaze of wrath, but something softer, deeper, a sorrow like a hidden tide, pressing quietly against the shores of his spirit. Few noticed at first, for gods are masters of masks and endless ceremony. But the skies knew, the winds knew, and soon the earth would know as well. For from that sorrow would fall a single tear, and with it, a story never forgotten. The halls of Olympus shimmered beneath the dawn, touched by a golden fire that never dimmed. Every marble column glowed, as if the sun itself lived within the heart of the mountain. The gardens overflowed with blossoms, their colors brighter than mortal eyes could name. Muses sang beside fountains, weaving melodies that lifted like wings into the open sky. Nymphs danced where the rivers flowed, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. Apollo's lyre sent notes drifting like sunlight, filling the air with radiant warmth. Artemis walked silently, her silver bow resting, her gaze steady as the moon. Hephaestus's forges roared softly, the sparks of creation floating like stars in the night. Each god moved in rhythm with eternity, each moment balanced in beauty and wonder. Olympus appeared timeless, untouched by sorrow, as if nothing could darken its bright crown. Yet above this harmony, high in the throne hall, Zeus sat in stillness unbroken. His throne of storm clouds shimmered faintly, lightning hidden deep beneath the calm surface. The eagle at his side shifted, watching its master with quiet, unspoken concern. To mortals, Zeus was thunder unending, the voice of order, the guardian of fate. To gods, he was the center of their power, the sun that kept their world steady. But on this morning, his eyes wandered, not with command, but with distant reflection. He gazed across the horizon where clouds drifted slowly, their shapes fading into blue. It was a gaze, not of a king, but of a soul, listening for something unseen. The silence pressed against him like a cloak, heavy, though it could not be touched. And in that silence, a question echoed. What stirs within the heart of Zeus? The winds, faithful messengers of the skies, felt the shift before words were spoken. They circled the mountain, whispering through halls and trees, carrying secrets unseen. Why does the thunder sleep? They murmured, their voices brushing the leaves with wonder. Why does the Storm King rest his gaze upon the distance and not the world below? The muses paused in their song, hearing the stillness stretch longer than before. Even Apollo looked up, his hands lingering over the strings, his melody unfinished. The gods of Olympus felt it too, though none spoke aloud of their unease. The air carried both brightness and weight, as if morning and twilight shared the sky. And Zeus, though silent, let the quiet remain, unwilling yet to break its hold. For within him, the stillness carried not wrath, but something softer, unspoken. The world below Olympus did not yet know of this silence upon the throne. Mortals prayed at temples, offered wine, grain, and fire, trusting their voices were heard. Sailors raised their hands before voyages, asking Zeus for skies free of storm. Kings bowed with reverence, believing the great thunderer watched with steady judgment. Children lifted their eyes to the sky, seeing clouds drift like ships of silver. They did not know their king of gods sat in thought, his heart wrapped in quiet. They did not know the heavens themselves could feel the weight of reflection. For mortals, the sky was eternal, the storm endless, the lightning unchanging. But in truth, even the keeper of storms could be still. Even the mighty could pause. And that pause was the beginning. the first breath of a story yet to unfold. Olympus, radiant and eternal, seemed unchanged to all who wandered its shining paths. Yet in the throne room, in the silent gaze of Zeus, a shift had begun. It was as gentle as a ripple upon water, as quiet as a shadow on stone, but it was real, and it would shape the days to come in ways unseen. For the stillness was not emptiness, but the prelude to something vast and rare, something even gods had never witnessed, something that would touch both heaven and earth. And though no one yet knew, the world was listening, waiting for the first sign. The sign would not be thunder, nor flame, nor the strike of divine command. It would be something softer, something fragile, something no god had ever expected. The stillness before the storm was not a storm at all, but the birth of a tear. Beneath the endless sky, Zeus carried a secret weight, hidden deep within the thunder of his soul. His hands still commanded storms, yet his heart drifted like a cloud untethered to the winds. For many days he watched the horizon, silent, though the world expected his voice to roar. The halls of Olympus remained bright, but shadows gathered quietly in the chambers of his mind. This sorrow was not born of war, nor of betrayal, nor the clash of gods or mortals. It came instead like a whisper, like a memory long forgotten but suddenly returned. Zeus remembered the beginning, when he rose to claim the skies, shaping order from chaos. He had thunder in his hand, lightning at his call, and all the heavens bent to him. Yet with each passing age, the weight of eternity grew heavier, pressing silently against his heart. Power commanded obedience, but it could not shield him from the truth of solitude. The gods around him did not notice, or perhaps they chose to look away. Hera, radiant in her majesty, spoke often of order, yet her words carried distance. Athena, wise beyond measure, saw the stillness but did not name it aloud. Apollo filled the skies with song, but even music could not reach the silence within Zeus. He hid his grief beneath the mask of thunder, a mask he had worn for countless ages. Yet even masks can grow heavy, and even the king of gods could not carry it forever. At night, when Olympus slept, he walked among the gardens in secret. Stars glimmered above, their light sharp and clear. Yet his eyes searched beyond them. He wondered if the stars themselves ever wept, unseen by mortals and gods alike. And in that wondering, a strange ache rose within him, tender and unrelenting. The winds grew restless as they watched, for they were closest to the sky-born king. They swirled around his throne, whispering questions the others dared not ask. "Why does the storm rest?" they asked, their voices curling like mist around the mountain. "Why does the king of thunder gaze upon the void as if waiting for an answer?" But Zeus offered no reply, only silence. And silence is louder than thunder when it lingers. It wrapped Olympus in unease, for the gods were unaccustomed to such quiet. They had seen their king in wrath, in joy, in command, but never in sorrow. The stillness spread like an unseen tide, touching every hall and garden. Even the muses lowered their voices, uncertain whether song was welcome. The golden fire of Olympus still burned, yet a hush filled the air between its flames. What was this sorrow that lay within the heart of Zeus? It was the sorrow of eternity, the knowledge that time moved for mortals but not for him. He watched kingdoms rise and fall, oceans shift their shores, mountains crumble to dust. Yet he remained, unchanging, bearing witness to all, and belonging to none. He saw mortals love with fire and grief with tears, their lives brief yet profound. And he envied them, though he would never speak it, not even to the stars. For what is power without the warmth of fleeting moments to give it meaning? What is eternity without the touch of change to shape its endless song? These questions pressed upon him, soft but relentless, until his spirit trembled in silence. And though he bore the crown of the skies, in his heart he felt profoundly alone. Thus the hidden sorrow grew, unseen by mortals, whispered only by winds. Zeus, the king of thunder, keeper of storms, carried a grief no lightning could strike away. It was a grief without fury, without flames, yet heavier than mountains, deeper than seas. A grief that did not roar, but waited quietly, patient as the turning stars. And in that waiting, the heavens themselves leaned closer, listening to the silence of their king. For from this sorrow, though none yet knew it, a new light would be born. A light, not of lightning, nor flame, but of something far softer, far greater. The hidden sorrow of Zeus was the seed of tears, and those tears would shape Olympus. They would fall not as storms, but as gifts, binding gods and mortals in ways unseen. And thus, the hidden sorrow became the quiet beginning of the tears of Olympus. High on the slopes of Olympus, the winds gathered, restless and curious as dawn touched the peaks. They were children of the sky, swift and free, yet bound by duty to carry whispers across the world. On this morning, they carried no message, for their voices were heavy with questions unanswered. They had watched their king in silence, his gaze lost, his thunder muted, his heart withdrawn. No storm had been called for many days. No lightning danced upon the clouds. The skies were calm, unnaturally calm, and the winds felt the weight of this stillness. They circled the mountain, weaving through marble halls and golden gardens with anxious flight. Their whispers brushed against pillars, trees, and fountains, carrying unease wherever they passed. "Why does the storm sleep?" they asked each other, their tones light as mist, yet sharp with worry. "Why does Zeus, the keeper of thunder, gaze at the horizon with eyes so distant?" The nymphs felt the murmurs as they drifted along the streams of Olympus. They paused in their dances, their laughter faltering as they listened to the winds. Even the muses heard, their songs trailing into silence, their harps waiting unplayed. The whispers spread quickly, from leaf to stone, from fountain to flame, until all of Olympus knew. The gods themselves began to wonder, though they spoke not aloud of their thoughts. Hera glanced at Zeus more often, her eyes sharp but questioning, her words left unsaid. Athena watched with quiet calculation, her wisdom telling her that sorrow hides beneath silence. Apollo's fingers hesitated on his lyre, as though a melody could not rise without its answer. Artemis stood in the shadows, gazing at her father with the patience of the moon. Hephaestus hammered slower, sparks falling without rhythm, as if even fire listened. The winds grew bold, for they were not bound by fear as mortals were. They dared to drift close to the throne, brushing their voices like feathers around Zeus. "Great One," they whispered, "why does thunder rest? Why does the sky weep without rain?" Their words were soft, but the throne room carried them like echoes across marble. Zeus did not move. His eyes remained fixed upon the horizon, his breath deep and steady. The eagle at his side stirred, spreading its wings with unease, as though hearing the question too. Yet the king of gods gave no answer, only silence, heavier than storms, louder than thunder. The winds shivered, uncertain, for they had never known their master to be so still. They left the hall but carried the silence with them, spreading it further across Olympus. And the mountain trembled not with fury, but with the quiet weight of unspoken sorrow. The whispers reached the mortal world, though mortals could not name their source. Sailors at sea felt the air shift, the breeze turning softer, carrying a note of longing. Farmers beneath the fields paused as the wind brushed their faces. Gentle but strange, poets lifted their heads, sensing an unseen sadness written into the air itself. Children looked to the clouds, whispering to each other that the sky seemed lonely, though they did not know the cause. Mortals felt the echo of Olympus in their hearts. The winds had carried the king's silence down from the mountain, threading it into the world. It became a hush upon rivers, a pause within forests, a stillness upon the sea. And everywhere it went, hearts stirred with questions they could not answer. For sorrow, even when unspoken, has a way of finding those who will listen. The winds returned to Olympus, restless, unsatisfied, their whispers louder than before. "Even eternity trembles," they sighed, "when the king of skies is silent." They swirled together at the mountain's peak, speaking as one, a chorus of unseen voices. If thunder will not speak, then the world must prepare for a storm of another kind. But what storm could rise from sorrow? What storm could be born of silence? The winds did not know, but they felt its weight, pressing like a tide upon their wings. They turned their gaze to Zeus again, waiting, watching, circling endlessly in their vigil. And though no word escaped his lips, his silence told more than lightning ever could. For in the stillness of his throne, a tear was forming, fragile as crystal, unseen by all. The winds, in their whispers, had named the sorrow, but the sorrow was only beginning. The great hall of Olympus shimmered as the gods gathered, summoned not by command but by unease. Hera stood beside her throne, her eyes steady, her presence regal and sharp as a crown of gold. Athena entered in silence, wisdom deep in her gaze, her voice withheld until the moment was right. Apollo carried his lyre, though no music rose, his fingers resting gently upon the golden strings. Artemis leaned against a pillar, her bow unstrung, her gaze fixed like moonlight on her father's face. Hephaestus wiped the ash from his hands, the sparks of his forge still clinging to his robes. Aphrodite sat gracefully, though even her radiance dimmed, her heart touched by unspoken worry. Hermes flickered at the edge of the gathering, his wings restless, his eyes darting with questions. The Muses lingered nearby, uncertain, their harps silent, their voices hushed beneath the heavy air. The council was not declared, yet all had come, drawn by the silence of their king. Zeus sat at the center, his throne vast and cloud-bound, his form both mighty and withdrawn. His hands rested upon the armrests, steady, yet his gaze remained lost in the horizon. No thunder shook the chamber, no lightning sparked, only a quiet that unsettled even the divine. Hera spoke first, her tone both regal and sharp, her words cutting through the silence like glass. Zeus, why do you sit so still? The sky waits, the earth waits, even we, your kin, wait. Her voice carried not anger, but concern, a question hidden beneath the weight of command. Zeus turned his eyes to her, yet he said nothing, and the silence deepened between them. Athena then rose, her words measured, her wisdom woven into each sound she spoke. Father, wisdom tells me that silence itself may speak, yet this silence carries sorrow. Why? The gods shifted uneasily, for Athena named aloud what all had whispered in thought. Apollo strummed a single chord upon his lyre, a sound that lingered like a fading star. Even music falters without the rhythm of the skies. What melody waits within your silence, Father? Artemis spoke from her shadow, her tone calm, steady as the night she ruled. The moon listens, the forests wait. Yet your stillness casts a shadow even upon them. Hephaestus folded his hands, his voice heavy as iron but gentle as his hidden heart. Even the forge burns quieter, Great One, as if waiting for your breath to stir the fire. Hermes stepped forward at last, his words quick, sharp, yet softened with rare gravity. Mortals ask me daily of your will, and I have no answer to carry them. Shall I lie? The council grew still again, their words hanging like mist, their questions unanswered. And still Zeus sat, the storm uncalled, his voice sealed as if behind unyielding stone. But though no words escaped him, his silence trembled with meaning, felt by all present. The eagle at his side shifted again, its golden eyes fixed upon its master with unease. Hera's face softened for a moment, her command slipping into quiet concern. Athena folded her hands, bowing her head slightly, as if in respect for unspoken truth. Apollo set aside his lyre, unwilling to break the stillness with sound. Artemis closed her eyes, listening deeper, as though hearing something beneath the silence. The gods began to understand, though no one dared to speak it aloud. The stillness was not neglect, nor was it wrath, but something greater, something fragile. The mighty king who bore the sky carried a sorrow that words could not contain. And in that hall, for the first time, the gods of Olympus felt the weight of his silence. They did not leave, nor did they press further, for to demand was to wound the moment. Instead, they sat with him, in silence, a council bound not by thunder but by quiet. The Muses, moved by the depth of it, hummed softly, not in song but in reverence. It was not music of joy, nor of sorrow, but of presence, of simply being near. The chamber glowed faintly, not from fire or lightning, but from the still breath of unity. And though Zeus spoke no word, the gods felt closer to him than in 1,000 decrees. For sometimes silence speaks louder than storms, and in this silence, Olympus listened. What they did not yet know was that this was only the beginning. A tier was forming, unseen, and its fall would change both gods and mortals forever. The council had gathered in search of thunder, but they found instead the birth of tears. Beneath Olympus, the mortal world stirred, sensing what they could not see, nor name. The skies were clear, yet heavy, the air gentle, yet filled with an unfamiliar weight. Farmers paused in their work, leaning upon their tools, gazing upward as if expecting rain. But no rain came, only the silence of the heavens, as if the sky itself held its breath. Sailors at sea noticed the stillness of the wind, their sails limp, their journey slowed. The ocean, vast and restless, had grown oddly calm, its waves moving with restrained rhythm. Children asked their elders why the clouds looked so lonely, yet none could answer. Poets wrote lines of longing, capturing in verse what their hearts felt but could not explain. Even kings and rulers felt uneasy, their advisors whispering of omens in the air. The world below had no words for it, yet it felt the sorrow of Olympus. In the city of Athens, a gathering of wise men spoke beneath the olive trees. They debated what silence from the heavens could mean, their voices low and uncertain. Perhaps the gods rest, one said, though even he did not believe his own words. Perhaps a storm greater than any before waits, another whispered, eyes wide with fear. But one poet, seated quietly, shook his head and spoke with a softer certainty. No storm waits above us. It is not thunder that is withheld, but something deeper. Sorrow. The men fell silent, for though he was only a poet, his words carried truth. They could not prove it. Yet, in their hearts, they knew he was right. The stillness of the sky was not anger, but grief, vast and unspoken. And grief, they knew, could reshape even mountains if left unanswered. Across distant lands, similar thoughts stirred in the minds of mortals. In Egypt, priests raised their eyes to the heavens, their rituals performed in uneasy silence. In Babylon, astronomers noted the calm of the stars, their records filled with puzzled lines. In the hills of Gaul, druids whispered to the forests, sensing sorrow in the trees. Even in the far reaches where Olympus was but a tale, the air carried its hush. For sorrow, when born in the realm of gods, traveled swiftly into mortal hearts. It was felt in the stillness of rivers, in the pause of birdsong, in the hush of night. Mothers, cradling their children, hummed lullabies, slower, gentler, without knowing why. Fathers looked to the horizon, troubled by what their souls sensed but could not name. The sorrow of Zeus had become the sorrow of the world, woven into the air itself. Yet, among mortals, some found meaning in the silence. Priests declared it a time of reflection, urging temples to fill with quiet prayer. Philosophers pondered if even gods were touched by grief, and what it meant for man. Some feared the silence, calling it a curse, a sign of doom yet to come. But others, especially the poets and dreamers, found comfort in its strange gentleness. For the silence of Olympus was not cruel, nor sharp, but tender, almost fragile. It was as if the sky itself had bowed its head, inviting the world to listen. And so, in many places, mortals began to listen differently. They paused in their rushing, in their endless work, to simply sit in stillness. And in that stillness, they too began to understand sorrow, not as weakness, but as truth. The winds carried whispers across oceans, threading together the hearts of many lands. Though they spoke in different tongues, their silence became one language shared by all. Mortals, without knowing, had begun to mirror Olympus itself. For even in their confusion, they chose to sit with the sorrow, not to fight it. And so, the bond between gods and men deepened, not through thunder, but through stillness. Above, Zeus remained silent, yet his tear grew heavier, closer to falling. He watched the mortal world reflect his grief, and his heart both ached and softened, for sorrow had become a bridge, unseen yet strong, binding heaven and earth. And as the world below hushed in unison, Olympus trembled quietly in response. The silence had spread, not as curse, but as a new kind of prayer, born of shared sorrow. Deep within Olympus, far from the council hall, the Muses gathered in a circle of quiet light. Their harps rested at their sides, strings silent, as though even melody feared to disturb the stillness. Each muse looked to the others, searching for courage in their sister's eyes, but finding only questions, for they had always sung of triumphs, of battles, of victories in love, but never of sorrow. Yet sorrow now filled the air, and they felt called to give it voice, though they trembled to try. Calliope, the eldest, spoke softly, her tone heavy with thought, yet warm with care. Sisters, silence reigns in the heart of Zeus, and silence spreads across the world below. Her words carried weight, and the younger muses bowed their heads, uncertain how to answer. Clio, the keeper of history, whispered that sorrow must be recorded, for memory gives pain its shape. But Euterpe, muse of music, shivered and said that sorrow, if sung, might wound the king further. The muses debated quietly, their voices mingling like threads, weaving a tapestry of hesitation. Some feared to sing, believing silence itself sacred, not to be disturbed by song. Others believed their gift was meant not to break silence, but to carry it more gently. Terpsichore spoke with trembling certainty, her hands pressed over her heart as she swayed. If we move with it, if we dance with sorrow, instead of against it, perhaps we honor it. Erato added softly that love itself is not free of grief, and song might soothe where words could not. The sisters turned their eyes toward the great hall, where Zeus still sat unmoving upon his throne. They felt his sorrow echo even here, in the quiet gardens where they met in secret. Polyhymnia closed her eyes and bowed her head, whispering that prayer too is song, if sung with care. And so, the muses resolved not to break the silence, but to shape it into something tender. That night, they gathered by the fountains of Olympus, where water shimmered like glass beneath moonlight. They held their harps close, not striking them, but letting their fingers hover above the strings. Instead of melody, they hummed softly, a tone that carried no words, only warmth. Their voices blended as one, not rising high, but flowing low, like water moving beneath still air. It was not a song of triumph, nor of joy, but of presence, of standing beside sorrow without fear. The air trembled with it, not loud, not sharp, but steady, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. The sound rose through the halls, threading through gardens, drifting into the throne room. Zeus did not turn his head, yet his chest stirred faintly, as though his breath shifted. The eagle lifted its wings slightly, its golden feathers catching the glow of torchlight. The muses continued, their voices weaving around the silence without breaking it, carrying it like a cradle. Other gods heard and paused, listening to the unfamiliar tenderness of the sound. Hera's eyes softened, her gaze shifting from suspicion to a quiet ache of understanding. Athena tilted her head, her lips pressing together, as though weighing wisdom in the shape of song. Apollo, for the first time in days, lifted his lyre and touched the strings gently in harmony. Even Artemis, who kept herself apart, bowed her head to the hum, as if the moon itself listened. The muses had not shattered silence, they had transformed it, given it shape without stealing its stillness. The gods felt the truth of it, like a hand upon the shoulder, steadying but never pressing. Zeus, though his face did not change, felt the weight of his sorrow shift ever so slightly. The song had not lessened it, but it had made the burden less lonely, less hidden. And though no words were spoken, the first tear upon his cheek trembled closer to falling. The muses ended with silence again, letting their final note fade into the night. They did not cheer, nor claim victory, for this was not triumph, but reverence. They bowed their heads, knowing their song had carried sorrow instead of denying it. And in their hearts, they understood they had witnessed the beginning of something greater. For grief, when met with tenderness, does not vanish, but it changes, softens, breathes. And in Olympus, For the first time since the silence began, the mountain exhaled. The fountains rippled, the gardens stirred. The stars above gleamed a little brighter. Zeus did not rise, nor did he speak, but the silence had shifted into something gentler, and all of Olympus felt that sorrow could be honored and even shared. It was a lesson the world below, too, would come to understand in time. Far beyond Olympus, where sea met sky, Poseidon stirred within his watery halls of coral and salt. The ocean god felt the silence ripple through the tides, soft yet heavy, unsettling the deep. Whales moved slower, their songs trailing off into uneasy echoes that vanished too quickly. The dolphins leapt less, circling as if searching for a current that had gone missing. Even the waves struck the shore without their usual rhythm, carrying sorrow instead of power. Poseidon rose from his throne, his trident shimmering, his brow furrowed with concern. For though storms belonged to him, he had not summoned this silence that bound the seas. He knew its source without question. It came from Olympus, from his brother, the Sky King. And the ocean groaned, mirroring the grief that Zeus held silently upon his throne. Poseidon clenched his trident, torn between anger and compassion, restless as the tide itself. In the underworld, Hades felt it too, though his realm was distant from wind and wave. The dead stirred in their endless fields, their shadows whispering of still skies above. The rivers of his kingdom slowed, their currents dimming, as if reluctant to move forward. Hades lifted his gaze from his throne of shadow, troubled by what reached even him. For death was eternal, yet even death trembled at the grief of a god above. Persephone placed her hand upon his, her voice calm, her presence steady as springtime light. Even Olympus feels sorrow, she said gently, and sorrow, when carried alone, becomes too heavy. Hades bowed his head, hearing truth in her words, though he gave no reply. He knew grief better than most, and he knew it could not be contained forever. Even in the realm of shadows, the silence of Zeus had left its mark. Across the mortal world, storms slept, seas quieted, and the night skies grew softer. Mortals prayed more often, not out of fear, but from an aching need to be heard. Temples filled with candles, their flames trembling as priests spoke of patience and humility. Poets gathered in marketplaces, reciting verses that carried sorrow but also strange beauty, for they had begun to understand silence was not punishment, but something tender. Children clutched their mothers' hands, sensing change though not knowing its cause. Shepherds in the hills played softer tunes on their flutes, weaving stillness into song. Sailors whispered to the sea, promising to listen if the waves would only return. And though none had seen Olympus, all felt its heartbeat shift within their own. For sorrow had reached them not as curse, but as quiet kinship. Back upon the mountain, the gods noticed the spreading stillness below. Hermes returned from his journeys, wings slower, eyes reflecting the hush of mortal lands. He told of fields where farmers prayed in silence, of cities where poets sang softly. He told of seas that waited, of forests that stilled, of hearts that listened. The council grew silent at his words, each god struck by the world's gentle response. They had expected fear, rebellion, even anger, but instead they found compassion. Athena placed a hand upon her chin, her gaze sharpened by deep thought. "This sorrow has bound gods and mortals alike," she said, her voice steady. "It has become a bridge, though fragile, between realms that seldom meet." And the gods, for once, had no argument, only silence in agreement. Zeus still did not rise, nor did he speak, but his silence had begun to change. The sorrow he carried no longer belonged to him alone. It now flowed through all creation. His stillness was no longer isolation, but a thread that tied Olympus to earth, sea, and shadow. The Muses' song had opened the way, and mortals had answered without knowing. And though his tear had not yet fallen, it glistened closer, heavy with meaning. For grief, when shared, does not vanish, but it softens, it transforms, it connects. Poseidon waited in his depths, Hades in his shadows, mortals in their prayers. All of creation seemed to pause, waiting for what the silence would become. Olympus itself trembled, not in wrath, but in the tender weight of change. And Zeus, though quiet, felt it He was no longer sorrowing alone. Far beyond Olympus, where sea met sky, Poseidon stirred within his watery halls of coral and salt. The ocean god felt the silence ripple through the tides, soft yet heavy, unsettling the deep. Whales moved slower, their songs trailing off into uneasy echoes that vanished too quickly. The dolphins leapt less, circling as if searching for a current that had gone missing. Even the waves struck the shore without their usual rhythm, carrying sorrow instead of power. Poseidon rose from his throne, his trident shimmering, his brow furrowed with concern. For though storms belonged to him, he had not summoned this silence that bound the seas. He knew its source without question. It came from Olympus, from his brother, the Sky King. And the ocean groaned, mirroring the grief that Zeus held silently upon his throne. Poseidon clenched his trident, torn between anger and compassion, restless as the tide itself. In the underworld, Hades felt it too, though his realm was distant from wind and wave. The dead stirred in their endless fields, their shadows whispering of still skies above. The rivers of his kingdom slowed, their currents dimming, as if reluctant to move forward. Hades lifted his gaze from his throne of shadow, troubled by what reached even him. For death was eternal, yet even death trembled at the grief of a god above. Persephone placed her hand upon his, her voice calm, her presence steady as springtime light. Even Olympus feels sorrow, she said gently, and sorrow, when carried alone, becomes too heavy. Hades bowed his head, hearing truth in her words, though he gave no reply. He knew grief better than most, and he knew it could not be contained forever. Even in the realm of shadows, the silence of Zeus had left its mark. Across the mortal world, storms slept, seas quieted, and the night skies grew softer. Mortals prayed more often, not out of fear, but from an aching need to be heard. Temples filled with candles, their flames trembling as priests spoke of patience and humility. Poets gathered in marketplaces, reciting verses that carried sorrow but also strange beauty, for they had begun to understand silence was not punishment, but something tender. Children clutched their mothers' hands, sensing change, though not knowing its cause. Shepherds in the hills played softer tunes on their flutes, weaving stillness into song. Sailors whispered to the sea, promising to listen if the waves would only return. And though none had seen Olympus, all felt its heartbeat shift within their own. For sorrow had reached them not as curse, but as quiet kinship. Back upon the mountain, the gods noticed the spreading stillness below. Hermes returned from his journeys, wings slower, eyes reflecting the hush of mortal lands. He told of fields where farmers prayed in silence, of cities where poets sang softly. He told of seas that waited, of forests that stilled, of hearts that listened. The council grew silent at his words, each god struck by the world's gentle response. They had expected fear, rebellion, even anger, but instead they found compassion. Athena placed a hand upon her chin, her gaze sharpened by deep thought. "This sorrow has bound gods and mortals alike," she said, her voice steady. "It has become a bridge, though fragile, between realms that seldom meet." And the gods, for once, had no argument, only silence and agreement. Zeus still did not rise, nor did he speak, but his silence had begun to change. The sorrow he carried no longer belonged to him. Alone it now flowed through all creation. His stillness was no longer isolation, but a thread that tied Olympus to earth, sea, and shadow. The Muses' song had opened the way, and mortals had answered without knowing. And though his tear had not yet fallen, it glistened closer, heavy with meaning. For grief, when shared, does not vanish, but it softens, it transforms, it connects. Poseidon waited in its depths, Hades in his shadows, mortals in their prayers. All of creation seemed to pause, waiting for what the silence would become. Olympus itself trembled, not in wrath, but in the tender weight of change. And Zeus, though quiet, felt that he was no longer sorrowing alone. Upon the highest peak of Olympus, dawn broke with gentle colors, softer than ever before. The sky glowed pale gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to disturb the mountain's silence. Gods gathered once more in the council hall, their faces solemn yet touched by something new. Not dread, not anger, but a quiet expectancy. as if they sensed change on the horizon. The muses lingered near, their harps resting, their voices ready should song be needed again. The silence was no longer heavy, but fragile, like glass that could either shatter or shine. Zeus sat unmoving, yet his presence felt different, as though he listened rather than withdrew. The eagle at his side ruffled its feathers, eyes alert, wings trembling with restrained motion. The gods did not dare speak first, for the air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was Apollo who finally stepped forward, his lyre hanging at his side. He strummed a single note, light and careful, letting it echo softly against marble pillars. It lingered like a whisper, neither demanding nor loud, but patient. Zeus's eyes flickered, the first true motion seen since sorrow had bound him still. The council stirred, hearts quickening, as if that one note carried hope within it. Apollo spoke, his tone warm, but humble in the presence of his father's grief. Great Zeus, silence has shaped us, yet silence is not the end. It is a beginning. He let the words rest, as though afraid to press them further than needed. Athena rose next, her wisdom sharp, yet softened by compassion rarely seen in her eyes. Father, sorrow teaches as victory cannot. Through it, gods and mortals have become closer. Her words carried weight, steady and deliberate, echoing in every ear that listened. Poseidon entered then, his trident gleaming with salt water, his voice deep as the sea. Brother, the waves themselves have slowed, not in defiance, but in mourning with you. He stepped nearer, his presence vast, yet his tone was gentler than the tide's usual roar. Grief is an ocean, endless, yet we need not drown when we swim together. Hades, cloaked in shadow, followed, his eyes steady, his tone grave but true. In the underworld, even the dead whispered of your silence. It reached them too. Persephone beside him added softly, sorrow is not weakness. It is love remembering itself. Her words lit the hall like spring sunlight piercing through the dark of winter. The council grew hushed, moved by voices that spoke not as rivals, but as kin. And for the first time, no god raised objection. No god spoke against another. The mortals' prayers rose faintly, carried by Hermes, who had just returned from below. They do not curse Olympus, Hermes said. They honor you with candles, with songs, with silence. He smiled faintly, wings brushing the ground, as if even swiftness had learned patience. Your sorrow has not broken them. It has taught them to feel, to listen, to share. Zeus shifted, his chest rising with a deeper breath, his face lined with stillness. The tear at last swelled, trembling at the edge of his eye, heavy with meaning. The muses bowed their heads, their hearts beating with quiet awe at the sight. The gods leaned forward, their gazes fixed upon the king who had long been unmoved. The world itself seemed to pause, waiting for the drop to fall, and when it did, it glistened as bright as the dawn itself. The single tear fell from Zeus's eye, descending slowly, shimmering like crystal. It struck the marble floor with no sound, vanishing into the mountain's heart. Yet all who witnessed felt its power, as though Olympus itself had shifted forever. The silence did not break. It transformed, softened, carrying the weight of love. For the tear was not despair alone, it was the union of sorrow and connection. The gods bowed their heads, not in fear, but in reverence, honoring the moment. Mortals far below looked skyward, sensing without sight that something vast had changed. The seas sighed, the forests stirred, and the stars lingered brighter in morning's glow. Zeus did not speak, yet his silence spoke louder than thunder ever could. And Olympus for the first time felt both grief and grace woven into one. The tear of Zeus sank deep into Olympus, vanishing into stone, yet leaving a mark unseen but felt. The mountain hummed softly, as though its very heart had been touched by divine sorrow. Rivers sprang clearer, their waters shining like crystal, carrying the echo of the silent tear. Gardens bloomed more gently, their colors vibrant yet softened by a calm grace. The skies above stretched wider, the dawn longer, as if time itself wished to linger. All creation had shifted, not in thunder or lightning, but in the quiet ripple of compassion. The gods stood in reverence, each holding the silence as though it were sacred, for they knew they had witnessed something beyond power, beyond decree, something eternal. Zeus, still seated upon his throne, raised his gaze to the hall at last. His eyes glistened, no longer hollow, but filled with both grief and understanding. He did not speak, yet his silence had changed, carrying weight and warmth together. The eagle spread its wings fully now, releasing a cry that echoed across the sky. It was not a cry of warning, nor of command, but of release, of freedom. The sound reached valleys and seas, forests and mortal villages far below. Mortals paused in their tasks, lifting their faces to the sky, sensing the shift. They felt not fear, but kinship, as though Olympus itself had breathed with them. Priests lit fires, not of fear, but of gratitude, letting smoke carry prayers of thanks. Mothers held their children closer, whispering that the gods still listened, still cared. Sailors on the sea prayed not for calm waters, but for courage to endure storms. Poets wrote verses of sorrow turned to strength, songs that carried both ache and hope. In the underworld, rivers flowed steady again, their silence deep, yet no longer hollow. Hades sat quietly, his shadowed eyes reflecting something like respect for his brother above. Persephone's gardens bloomed brighter, as if even the earth of the dead had softened. She whispered that sorrow had become seed, from which compassion could grow eternal. In the sea's depths, Poseidon felt the currents regain their rhythm. Whales sang once more, their voices long and deep, carrying peace through endless water. Dolphins leapt high again, their arcs across the waves filled with joy unburdened. The tides rolled steady, no longer restless, but patient and assured in their course. The ocean god rested his trident at his side, allowing the seas to flow free. He bowed his head, though no one watched, honoring his brother's tear in silence. On Olympus, the muses gathered once more, harps gleaming, voices ready. But this time, they did not hum in sorrow. They sang gently of renewal. Their melodies carried through the air like sunlight through leaves, tender yet strong. Each note was a reminder that grief need not be hidden, but shared. Their song blended with the silence, weaving it into a new harmony. Other gods listened, their hearts softened, their rivalries forgotten for a time. Hera, whose heart often burned with pride, sat quietly with eyes shining. Athena smiled faintly, wisdom tempered with compassion as she watched. Apollo strummed his lyre again, this time in joy rather than in yearning. Artemis lifted her bow, but instead of hunting, she looked to the stars with peace. Zeus closed his eyes, listening, not as a ruler but as a father, as kin. The single tear had not broken him, it had freed him. For the first time, he understood that kingship was not only thunder and command, it was also silence, listening, and the courage to let sorrow be seen. His heart still ached, but it no longer isolated him from those he loved. He felt the bond between gods, mortals, and the earth itself renewed. The mountain of Olympus no longer carried a silence of despair, but of grace. And in that stillness, life stirred brighter, stronger, more connected than before. The story of the tear of Olympus would be told for ages to come, not as tragedy, but as a testament that even gods weep, and in weeping, they heal.